So far away, Lucas, what is your favourite piece of Lord of the Rings media? And folks at home, same question, let us know in the comments.
Maybe slightly controversially, I'm really starting to come around to maybe that Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Rings is my favourite of the movies.
Well, oddly enough, I watched that just the other day. And specifically, Lucas, on this episode of Wiki Weekends, the series where I, your host for this one, Karl Smallwood, scour the lengths and breadths of the internet to find a wiki on a subject I'm interested in and go through it with you to see what kind of conversation arises as a result. We're talking about Sauron, the overarching antagonist of the Lord of the Rings series. And disclaimer here for fans of the books, myself and Lucas are more familiar with the movies, the video games, and like the TV show. Did you watch any Rings of Power? Because Sauron's in that a little bit. So we're more familiar with that stuff, and we are aware that all those pieces of media do depart from the books in minor and major ways. For example, the character of Sauron, at no point in the original books do they ever mention that he's a giant fucking glowing eyeball. That was a thing entirely made up for the movies, because movies are a more visual medium than books, so they needed a way to show that Sauron was always watching in a just easily understandable visual way, so they thought, giant fucking flaming eyeball.
And that is the thing about interpretations, right? Is that no one generally gets mad at an interpretation if it's done as fantastically as Lord of the Rings. Like, it's a massive departure, as you say, but like, the big glowing eye of Sauron looks rad as fuck, so who cares? And I will say, the thing that annoys me about, like, a lot of these streaming fantasy shows, and just shows in general, is that there's never enough, like, weathering and aging on anyone's outfits and armour and, like, weapons and stuff.
Which is something Lord of the Rings, like the movie series, did really, really well. To the point where a lot of the principal actors who, like, starred as the Fellowship wore their costumes all the time on set and over the course of the 3 movies, so that it would look realistically weathered as if they'd taken an actual journey across a huge, vast wasteland.
And it needed to look like this guy had slept in any cave or crevice and travelled great distances. Viggo Mortensen, who played this character, really was into this idea that he himself had repaired it when it starts to sort of come apart.
Yeah, and they also, like, everyone always looks so clean as well.
Yeah, which makes sense for the elves, because the elves are perfect.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make sense for, like, the hobbits, and that's just a problem with, like, movie making in general, right? Like, remember we talked about, like, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and the flashback they have in Multiverse of Madness to, like, the Illuminati defeating Thanos. They clearly didn't weather any of the costumes to make it look like they'd been in a big battle, even though they were supposed to have just finished a climactic, huge, giant battle with Thanos. And as a result, it looks like just Doctor Strange beat Thanos on his own. The Illuminati came in and killed him.
Yeah, like, look at the state that everyone's in at the end of, like, the fights in Infinity War, right? Yep. Like, everyone is battered and bruised and losing their armor and stuff, and then, like, you just got this pristine Illuminati stood there in, like, untouched armor.
And you know the reason for that is because, well, fuck it, we've only got these people on set for a day. Put them in the costume and just film the scene. But when you analyse that scene and look at the characters and their outfits, they don't look like they've been in a big battle. So the only thing you can surmise from that detail is that they weren't part of the fight. Right?
Yeah, like, it should have just been that the bottom of Professor X's bubble car was, like, or bubble wheelchair, was, like, just bloodied, as if he's, like, stamped on Thanos with it.
I think I'm going to say it had, like, a wheel missing or something, he's just sideways. Well, I guess we've got to give a big shout-outs to the Lord of the Rings, like, movie series for just the fact that almost everything they did was practical.
What I was looking for, them as much length as I possibly could.
And the effect still looks good, but because I'm aware of how they did it, and because it's so famous now for its in-camera work to make Ian McKellen look massive, that effect just looked really comical to me.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left. $12.96.
I think that's probably just you getting in your own head, because when I rewatched it recently, like, I didn't really... It's not that I didn't notice it, but I didn't think that it looked bad in any way.
Yeah, and one thing that struck me when I was rewatching it is, man, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that people know about the making of this movie that's not true. For example, you probably heard, Lucas, do you know when Ian McKellen's walking about, like, Bag End and he whacks his head on the ceiling? Have you heard that? Like, you presumably heard, like, oh, did you know that was a mistake and they left it in the script?
I've heard that before.
Yeah, do you know that's, like, bullshit? Someone just made that up. Ian McKellen did not accidentally hit his head. It was in the script.
Yeah,
that he's supposed to hit his head. Because if it was a mistake, you'd see that, like, the camera would keep moving, but the camera clearly stays on him as he hits his head, which is not how it had been if he was supposed to just move from one shot to the next. And despite that, the rumour about him hitting his head by accident is still really prevalent. But Lucas, we'll move back to the topic of today's video, Sauron now. And before we get to anything, we've got to cover the band names, because this is like a Lord of the Rings character. So of course he has a dozen kick-ass band names. And I'm pretty sure some of these actually are real-life band names, because Lord of the Rings is a hugely influential series for many types of media, including music. For example, a band that I quite like, Blind Guardian, started as a Lord of the Rings inspired heavy metal band, and all their songs are about things that happen in Lord of the Rings in the expanded universe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty rad, and I would be astounded if I found out that Sauron, of all beings, did not have some absolute band names.
Exactly, yeah. And the first one, Lucas, pretty classic, but it's almost cliche, but it's only a cliche because it's Sauron's nickname, the Dark Lord.
And the Dark Lord is great, and I want to say regarding, like, tropes and stuff, a lot of the time, I'm like, oh god, like, high fantasy is so tropey because everything just feels like Lord of the Rings, and that's, like, a lot of it is literally because of Lord of the Rings,
Yeah,
right?
like, for example, like Tolkien literally invented dwarves. Not the concept of dwarves, but the word. Like, his specific pluralization of dwarves with a V is not the way you're supposed to pluralize that word. Or at least it wasn't until Tolkien kept putting it in his books, and every time his editor tried to change it back to dwarves with an F, Tolkien wrote back like, no, dwarves in my fucking universe are pluralized with a V. Fuck you, put the V back in. So as a result, Tolkien literally invented that word.
And he invented many words, many fake words.
He did indeed, yeah. And are you aware, and speaking of bands, there is a band named after what Tolkien deemed to be the most beautiful word in the English language. Would you like to hazard a guess? And it's something I've told you before, and I'll give you a clue. It's the word you would use for the entranceway to a basement, and it sounds very Lord of the Rings-esque.
I've got no gist of a clue here, to be honest.
It is Cellar door. And Lucas, if you would, could you now say the words cellar door slowly in a more grandiose fashion so people get what I mean?
Karl, you need to go through the cellar door.
Yeah, it sounds like a word from Lord of the Rings, right? Like Isildur, like Galadriel, all those like fancy ass words that sound rad as fuck. And there is a band called Cellar Door.
And I want to clarify here, Karl is not saying the two words cellar door, as in like the door to a cellar. It's like one word, right?
Combining, the band is them combined, but just Tolkien really liked the word cellar and door, and then you put them together and you can see the inspiration a lot of stuff like Isildur and stuff like that, right? Mithril, like the way they're pronounced in his work. It's like, ooh, you can tell he liked that kind of sound in his words. But, you know, we're not finished with Sauron's alternate names. Now we have the Black Hand, the Black Master, the Base Master of Treachery, the Deceiver, the Enemy, the Sorcerer, the Necromancer, the Nameless One, the Unnamed, the Shadow, the Ringmaker, the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of Gifts, the Lord of Mordor, the Lord of the Earth, the Ruler, God King, King of Men, King of Kings.
I mean, King of Kings is a great one. I do really like the Nameless One.
The Nameless One is such a rad fucking name, right? And Lucas, we have here a brief introduction to Sauron. Sauron, the eponymous Lord of the Rings, was the greatest fallen Maya, maker of the One Ring and chief agent of Morgoth. Why are some of the words from Lord of the Rings just rad as fuck, right? Morgoth. Morgul
there's
Blade.
so many proper nouns and so many of them sound cool as fuck.
And do you have like a favourite just word from Lord of the Rings?
I may be pronouncing that wrong, but I just love, like, all of the different locations in Lord of the Rings. They sound rad.
Yeah, like Bag End.
I mean, Bag End is also just
Great, right? Or Mount Doom.
Oh,
Just think about Tolkien, isn't it? Like, the dude, like, literally invented languages for the fictional races he also invented. Like, for example, the dwarves in Tolkien's, like, mythology. There are multiple different dwarven languages. My favourite being a subspecies of dwarves who only speak in sign language because they permanently live next to the forges, so they're all deaf. So they all speak in sign language, but then he went and made a mountain called Mount Doom.
Yeah. Some of it is, like, just, hitting that nail right on the head, but just other times it's like, yeah, just rad as fuck sounding different things, and just like, I also just like the name Smaug, right?
Oh, Smaug is so good. I just Smaug, the dragon. Just. I've not read much of Lord of the Rings. I tried in college a few times and could never get through it, but I did like The Hobbit. Because The Hobbit's just a children's story, right? He wrote it for his grandchildren, did Tolkien, and then he liked the universe so much, because he was a language nerd, or a word nerd as they prefer to be called, and he kept making up like elven languages, and then wrote Lord of the Rings as justification for those languages.
Yeah, and it's weird, right? Because the way that he made Lord of the Rings is in universe. The book that he wrote, Lord of the Rings, is just a translation of the texts that he found.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like weird stuff about Lord of the Rings. That's one thing. It's almost unadaptable. The fact that Peter Jackson was able to adapt Lord of the Rings into something that's pretty easily understandable, and if you watch the theatrical version, you can get through in about 7-8 hours.
I think it's about 14.
That's the extended edition, right? Because I think whenever we watched it with my friend, we got to I said, "Is this the extended edition?" I went, "No, it's not." I went, "But it's 2 hours long." I went, "Yeah, the extended edition's like 3 hours long." I went, "Oh fuck, it is, isn't it?"
Yeah, I live in a household where the only version of Lord of the Rings that is allowed to be played is the extended version. I don't get a say in the matter.
Yeah, and Joe, one thing I did notice when I was watching just the theatrical version of Lord of the Rings is that they haul so much fucking ass.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the bit that stuck out to me is where, and fair play to Peter Jackson for making the movie like this, where, Frodo gets the ring, and Gandalf says, "I need to go find something out." And he goes all the way across Middle-earth, goes into a library, sits down for 10 seconds, reads a book, and then goes all the way back. Right? And in my head, that took 1 day. But in the movie, it takes fucking months, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's modern movie making has kind of altered my perception of that scene, because in my head, that was 1 day later, but I know in the movie it's supposed to be months, right? And I was thinking, I said to my friend, I went, if this would have been made today, they wouldn't have had that scene, because that would have cost too much money to do. They would have just said that Gandalf learned that off screen, right? And just combine those two together. They would not have had Gandalf fuck off for 3 months to come back to the same location and continue that conversation, right? But that's what they do, because that's what happens in the books.
I do like the idea of just you ask Gandalf one question, he's like, I'll be right back.
Yeah, I mean, in the movie, it's months, clearly, but because it's literally scene, Gandalf fucks off, Gandalf comes back, it makes it feel like it was the next day.
Yeah.
And I think that must be where there must be a bunch of deleted scenes around that. That I feel like you can clearly tell where the deleted scenes are. For example, when they meet the elves, and they meet the elves, they have a scene, and then they're fucking off in their boat, and just Frodo has the magic elf water. That was a bit quick. There's a deleted scene there, isn't there, where Gimli gets the hairs. They went, yeah.
What was her gift?
I asked her for 1 hair from her golden head. She gave me 3.
It's insane to think that Peter Jackson initially pitched this as a 2-part movie.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, make it 3.
Make it 3 parts, yeah.
It's he made 6 movies in the end, basically, with how long the extended editions are. Not talking about The Hobbit, that's a separate thing. but he basically made 6 movies worth of content for The Lord of the Rings and then cut it down to 3 movies.
I will say a lot of the stuff they cut out was probably wise to cut out for the sake of the runtime, but when you know that it's supposed to be there, it does make the film quite jarring to watch. For example, like I said, when they just randomly get the elf water, because presumably, like, Peter Jackson's like, well, it's an important scene in the books, but all you need to know is that the elves gave Frodo something very important that's going to come up later in the story. You don't need to know that Gimli got some fucking hairs off the top of this elf's head. Even though it's important in the books, it's not important to the story I'm telling.
I will always, be the person that says, while I admit that the extended trilogy is the better version of the films, I think the theatrical cuts were necessary and they're the best way to watch it for the first time.
And for the most part, the cuts that were made, like I said, they make sense and you can understand them for the sake of the runtime. But there's a couple that create quite big plot holes. For example, when the Witch King of Angmar dies.
Die now.
Because the Witch King's there, like, no mortal weapon or man can hurt me. And then he gets stabbed in the back of the leg by a fucking dagger by a hobbit. And he goes down like a sack of shit. And every time you bring this up, someone will go, but in the extended edition. It's like, but we're talking about the theatrical cut. We're talking about the version of the movie that was released in cinemas. And if you just watch that, and you ignore all of the extra stuff that was cut from the movie, the Witch King of Angmar just goes down like a bitch for no reason.
We're talking about the version of the movie that 90% of the audience has only ever seen.
It's fascinating, right? Because that's a massive plot hole of like, well, why did that hurt the Witch King? When he specifically says nothing can hurt or kill him.
And that's one funny thing, right? Is the line like, no man can kill me or whatever it is, and it's I am no man.
I am no man.
Always like framed as if it's, oh well, it's cool because she's a woman, and like he means that no male can hurt him, and it's like, no, he means that no mortal should be able to kill him.
Yes, but it's the dagger that weakens him and means that a man can kill him. But for the sake of the movie, they change it ever so slightly so that we don't need the scene of him getting a magical special MacGuffin dagger to hurt the Witch King. Just have it so he just gets stabbed in the fucking face. Like, you know what? Eat shit, King of Evil.
It's easy to understand, right?
It's easier to understand, yeah. And you can't make an assumption that it's a magical dagger because that's not laid out in the text. It's not even hinted at in the text because they ignore it completely. It's just a dagger that he happens to have and it hurts him. It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it's like the extended editions were being worked on like months or years after the movies were already put together, right?
And just cobbled together from all the stuff there. But let's move back now to Sauron. We have his character here. So, despite being the title character of Lord of the Rings, he is the eponymous Lord of the Rings. Sauron never directly appears in the events of the trilogy, and nowhere is a description given in detail of what he looks like. And that's fascinating, right?
So in the movie, Sauron's in the intro, right?
Yeah, he's which is very wise that they put the cool action scene right at the start. And I do like, in the movies, again, he's never directly described in the books. They only hint about what he might look like. But what do they do for the movie? Oh, he's like 9 feet tall. He's 9 feet tall and he has that great moment where he just does the backhand with a mace and just takes out an entire army in one swing. Again, a visual representation of how powerful he's described as being in the books, of he can destroy an entire army of men with a wave of his hand. It's like, well, put a mace in his hand and just have him physically, literally destroy half an army, right?
Yeah, he is in that part, but then he's only ever the Eye of Sauron, which doesn't exist in the book, like, after that point, and there's no like battle at the start of the books that's explaining what happened to Sauron.
No,
right?
they just mentioned that the king, like Isildur, cut his ring finger off years ago. Which, you know what, as well, Sauron, make some armor for your hands.
Right? Better armor,
right? He's supposed to be the biggest, baddest motherfucker in, like, you know, all of Middle Earth, and he gets his finger cut off by not even a sword, a broken sword.
Yeah, I don't think they mentioned that it's like any magical entity or anything. It's just a sword, right?
No, it's a really fucking good one. I do like that as well when, like, Aragorn is looking at the sword and it's all broken up. And I think that's such a cool fucking visual. Of like the sword all broken up on the thing, and it's like, oh, it's still sharp like thousands of years later. It's like, yeah, 'cause it's a fucking good sword. And like they completely rip that off for like that Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor games, where like Talion, the main character of that, has his sword broken and he uses this. Oh, his son's sword is broken. He uses it as a dagger.
Oh, okay.
In the time of the Silmarillion, however, Sauron was a shapeshifter, taking in one instance the form of a serpent, a vampire, and a werewolf. Did you know Sauron was a werewolf and a vampire?
I didn't know, and it is interesting, right, though, because, again, you don't know what Sauron looks like, because how do you know what a shapeshifter ever looks like? What's their base form?
Yeah, it's like, what does Mystique look like? Well, she's a blue lady with red hair. Well, is that what she looks like, or is that what she chooses to look like? Mm-hmm. Right? They're a shapeshifter. After Morgoth's fall, Sauron appeared in fair form as Anata, the Lord of Gifts, and maintained this appearance till the fall of Numenor, in which he was unable to ever take a fair form ever again. As mentioned, we don't know exactly what Sauron looked like, but it does mention here that in the history of Middle-earth there is a passage vaguely describing how the Numenorians saw Sauron, which goes as follows. Upon that ship, which was cast highest and stood dry upon a hill, there was a man, but greater than even any race of the Numenor in stature, and it seemed to men that Sauron was great, that they feared the light of his eyes. To many he appeared fair, to others terrible, but to some evil. And I like that you can read that multiple ways. You can read it literally, that he's greater than any man, so he's just ginormous, or just that he exudes an aura of power and authority that rivals and surpasses that of any mortal man. That just like, he just exudes this just ethereal sense of power and authority that just trumps that of any other being in Middle-earth.
Does it specify a race for Sauron?
It does, but I can't pronounce the word.
Can you try?
Maya.
Okay.
So he's a Maya. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. The wiki continues. A few clues are given as to Sauron's appearance as the Dark Lord after he lost the ability to take a fair form. Tolkien described him in one of his letters as having the form of, and I quote, a man of more than human stature but not gigantic, and as an image of malice and hatred made visible. That's all we really get. Which is, again, very open to interpretation, and the interpretation they chose for the movies is that of a man in a set of pimp as all fuck looking armour who's like 12 and a half feet fucking tall.
Yep.
But there's other interpretations. I think it's like the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings adaptation, where just Sauron is just this evil fucking cloud monster, which also works.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to like actually visualise what is essentially just some kind of all-seeing god entity thing.
It's a common trope in media, isn't it? It goes all the way back to the fucking Bible, where like the meme like biblically accurate angels, right?
Yes.
Angels aren't humanoid beings with fucking wings, at least if you go by the description given in the Bible, because the description in the Bible is you can't comprehend what they look like. And it's similar for Sauron, of no one knows what he looks like because everyone sees something different because he's just so fucking evil. There are some things, though, that seem consistent across the descriptions of Sauron. One being that he gives off great heat, such that Gil-galad was burned to death by his touch, and Isildur would describe Sauron's hand as black, yet burning like fire. Gollum, one of the only creatures in all of Middle-earth to have seen Sauron directly and survived, describes him as having only 4 fingers on his black hand, suggesting that Sauron was unable to generate the finger from which Isildur took the One Ring.
So, a little bit different from the way it's depicted in the film, where, like, chops all those thingies off.
He does indeed, yeah. In addition to his physical appearance, Sauron also apparently had an aura of incredible malevolence. A passage in the Silmarillion describes him as having a dreadful presence and daunting eyes.
See, you're saying all these things, and you know what I'm picturing in my head? Malice, Karl. Pure malice.
Pure malice. Stop mentioning Marvel Rivals. You want me to put that picture in? And in one of his letters, Tolkien made a brief comparison between Sauron and the devil. You know, another, like, just metaphysical entity that can't ever really be described, and all of the like artistic representations of the devil are just people's best interpretation of what a being of incredible evil and malevolence would actually look like. And that's the cool thing about Sauron, that the image most people likely have in their mind of Sauron, this towering figure clad in black armour, is not how he was ever described in the books, because he wasn't described in the books there was only like vague descriptions given of like, what people thought he looked like. Which is interesting, right? Because if you ask me what does Sauron look like, people either say it's the guy in black armour or the big eye, neither of which appear in the original source material.
And I know that there's Sauron as a character in the Rings of Power, right?
Yeah,
where again, they're just a shapeshifter, and they're just being whoever the fuck they want to be when they want to be.
Which is really funny as well, because that was also criticised. Like, when the Rings of Power came out, people complained, well, Sauron's in it and he looks like an elf. It's like, yeah.
No emissary of the Valar would do this. Who are you? Truly.
I am the one keeping the storm at bay.
Yeah, it's way scarier, an idea that you actually don't know what Sauron looks like, really. Like, yes, you might have seen Sauron as a shapeshifted form, but you don't know what their true form looks like.
Also, the fact he can shapeshift means that any adaptation that shows him looking like basically anything will be valid because he could fucking transform.
Yeah, every single way of visualizing Sauron is technically correct because Sauron could look like anything.
And we move on now, Lucas, to powers and abilities. Sauron was among the mightiest of the Maiar, originally of the Ole people. He acquired great, and I quote, scientific knowledge of the world's substances and how to use them. He would retain this knowledge throughout his reign as the Dark Lord, using it to forge the One Ring and construct his fortress. Sauron also seemed primarily linked to the use of fire. As Morgoth's chief lieutenant, his ability to tap into the fires of the earth was of great value.
And I always imagined Sauron as being some kind of sorcerer, magical being thing, not necessarily more like science-based.
Well, that's one of the things that makes Sauron so dangerous, and it's one of the interpretations of many about the Lord of the Rings books. People have drawn many conclusions about what Lord of the Rings is a metaphor for, and one of them is that Sauron and his dark forces represent industry. And that's why the dark force that is travelling across Middle-earth is the orcs. And what do the orcs do when they get into a new area? They strip the land of all resources and create their war machines, right? And that's why another interpretation has been World War One, which, Tolkien experienced personally.
The old world will burn in the fires of industry.
I do think is a really good visualization in the movie where you see them like birthing the Uruk-hai out of the grounds and like just seeing that they've got such a good idea for like the effects of them like bursting through like the skin of the like flesh and everything. It's like it looks so cool and just always disturbed me as a kid.
Well, the Uruk-hai are badass as fuck. That one Uruk-hai that ends up being like the main Uruk-hai, like Lurtz, he has a confirmed kill 5 seconds after being born. And what a fucking badass is that guy, right? But also, I like that visual in that scene where you see the huge chasm in the earth and just all the orcs and the goblins are just throwing fucking trees into the chasm, right? And you see Gandalf wake up on the tower and he looks down and all the trees are just gone because Sauron's dark forces have just stripped the land of any usable resources to just continue this like quest across it to dominate everything. And there are multiple ways you can interpret that. And as mentioned, one of them is like it represents industry, another is war. And, those interpretations are as valid as any other because that's the whole point of media, right? You interpret it the way that you want, and there's probably a way that Tolkien originally intended it, but...
I do find it funny in the film when it's like, they meet like Treebeard and the Ents and stuff, and it's like, we are not trees, and then they see the trees burning, and they're like, we will burn everyone to the ground for the trees.
Among Sauron's chief powers were deception and disguise. In the First Age, Sauron took on many forms. During his battle against Luthien and Huan in the Silmarillion, he took on no less than 4 separate shapes. His normal shape, some kind of terrible dark sorcerer, a great wolf, a serpent, and finally a vampire. And it notes here that the description in the book is dripping blood from his throat upon the trees. At the end of the First Age, Sauron took on a fair form to appeal to the captain of the host of the Valar and ask for a pardon. In the Second Age, he took up on that fair form again and used it under the alias Anatar to deceive the elves into creating the Rings of Power. That's why he appears in the show The Rings of Power, because it's Sauron taking on his fair form to fool people to create the rings. And Joe else is in Rings of Power. It's the boy, it's Celebrimbor, who's like your secondary bro in Shadow of Mordor.
Suffer me now!
Right, okay.
Yeah, like Celebrimbor's in that. And one of the funniest things, I played Shadow of War over Christmas because I was wanting a game that I could fly through without thinking about it. And Celebrimbor appears in Rings of Power, and fans of the Shadow of War games were annoyed that the version of Celebrimbor in Rings of Power isn't the version in Shadow of War.
For fighting this pitiful enemy, the Dark Lord promised mercy! Gaze now upon the Bright Lord! I make no such offer! Fuck American pride! Fuck the media! Fuck all of it!
And it's like, that must be so weird to like Tolkien scholars, right? There are people out there who think that the version of a character from the books in a video game is the version of the character that exists to the point where they are complaining about a TV show that is directly inspired by the books.
Oh god, my brain hurts.
Right?
Just thinking about like all the different, oh god.
Like people, like the fans of that game who complained about Rings of Power not drawing more from the game.
Can we just mention, by the way, Karl, like the whole naming convention now with like, say for example, there's a new Shire game coming out and it's something like Tales of the Shire or something, but it's like the Lord of the Rings game, and it's like it's something. I think it's called Tales of the Shire, the Lord of the Rings game, and it's like, what are you doing? It's like, why do you have to stick that at the end? Is it like you're that incompetent in your own branding that like you don't trust consumers to know that it's something to do with Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. It's also, it always comes down to branding, right? Like, they own it and they want to use it. And it is weird to think that there are people out there who are fans of all these different versions of, like, Lord of the Rings media, to the point where they see that as, to them, the core canon of the series. Like I said, there are people out there legitimately mad at the Rings of Power because the version of Celebrimbor in that is not the version in the games, even though the version in the games is nothing like he's in the books, because he's in the books for, like, he's in there for a little bit, but he certainly didn't rock around with the OC Talion as a ghost.
Karl, do you reckon Gollum would have sold better if it was called Gollum, i.e. the Lord of the Rings game?
I don't know. I think it would have sold better if he could do the moveset he did at the end of that Lord of the Rings game, where all he does is missile drop kicks at the edge of Mount Doom.
Wait, what?
Yeah, would you like? There's like 50 different Lord of the Rings games. There's one of them where like the final fight against Gollum, the only move he has is like just a fucking drop kick, and it's Gollum trying to drop kick you into Mount Doom.
Oh,
so where was that shit?
Like, where was the ability to play as Sauron in that, like, Return of the King game?
And you can play as Sauron and the bad guys in some Lord of the Rings games. Like, I think the Lord of the Rings, like, RTS games, you can play as the bad guys. I was going to say,
I presume something like Battle for Middle-earth or something you can play as it.
And I used to like playing Sauron's forces in those games because they had the better powers. Like, for example, you could make orcs for free because fuck it, they're orcs, right? Just get as many as you want.
Could you play as, like, the ghost army and just swarm people with millions of ghosts?
I think Aragorn, as a hero unit, his power was to summon the ghost army. You could have the army of the dead. And it was fucking unstoppable. And I remember if you played the game and leveled up enough for, like, the final mission where you get it as, like, a story power, you could have your leveled up Aragorn call the ghost army in. But then you could have, like, the story ghost army and have two armies of the dead. And you just go, fuck that. Right?
I mean, like, they should be unstoppable, right? They're an army of ghosts.
It's also like another huge plot hole in the movie is that Aragorn, after these, like, this army of the dead has been, like, you know, waiting for their king for what, like, centuries. He immediately tells them, like, that the oath is complete instead of saying, "Would you mind waiting around for, like, half an hour? Do you mind doing, like, one sweep across Middle-earth to make sure there's no orcs left?"
Do you want to just, like, do a round 2? Just make sure?
Just make sure, yeah? Like, you know, I know you've been waiting centuries, but would you mind waiting, like, 6 months? Right? Just 6 months.
Just hang on. Wait here. We'll make sure that the ring gets destroyed before we let you go.
And again, people always say, well, in the books they do. So I know in the books they do that, but in the movie, it just looks like Aragorn has the most broken OP power ever. Like his level 10 upgrade, and he only uses it once instead of going, hang on, I'm just gonna, these guys are pretty good. I've got an invincible, unkillable army that will obey my every word. Maybe I'm gonna hang on to these for a little bit.
I'm just gonna double check there's no more like Moomakill roaming around, right?
Yeah, just make sure there's a couple knocking about, right? Just check. Just leave half of you guys here, right? We move back to Sauron now, Lucas. The level of deception required to fool the elves must have gone beyond simply taking on a fair form, since Sauron was literally instructing the elves to make artifacts that, while capable of great good, were ultimately purposed for his own domination, were imbued with the power to arrest the natural order of the world. Yet, the elves were wholly unaware of who they were dealing with until the 11th hour, and only narrowly escaped his trap, which means that it goes beyond, like, he just made himself look like another dude. This must have been the most OP disguise magic ever. Because he fooled the fucking elves.
He must have, like, remembered Legolas's name.
I love that. When you told me that, I pointed that out to my friend. I'm like, yeah, just keep an eye out. This is the only time that Legolas and Frodo ever talk in the entire franchise. And my friend's like, no, that can't be true. I went, no, well, watch the entire movie. Is there another point you ever see Legolas and Frodo directly interact? We found one, Lucas, because there is another time Legolas and Frodo interact, and it's when they're in, like, the Mines of Moria. Legolas says, jump, or something like that to Frodo, and it's trying to jump across the bridge.
Oh god, now you've just got to put in that clip of, like, him jumping and defying gravity in the Hobbit films. God.
Why didn't he do that in the fucking Lord of the Rings? It gets another massive plot hole, right? The Hobbit created plot holes in Lord of the Rings. Like, why wasn't Legolas doing that shit?
I saw a post not long ago. It was literally like a few days back, and it was like talking about how like Legolas had like 42 kills in the Battle of Helm's Deep or something, but he gets like 30 of them in about 10 minutes. It's like, what was he doing for the rest of the entire night?
Do you know what he was doing, Lucas? He was taking a break because he was fucking tired from carrying the Fellowship the entire time, right? Like, he's that guy on your team who gets like 40 fucking kills while the rest of the team can't get the objective. He's like, I'm 20 foot. Oh, can you just cap the objective, please?
He's just Hawkeye in the back sniping everyone.
He's so fucking good. Oh, centuries later, Sauron was able to deceive the Númenóreans and steer them directly to their own destruction under the promise of eternal life. Such destruction is a testament to Sauron's manipulative nature and ability to twist the perceptions of his enemies. This power was more than just simple, cunning manipulation. However, as Sauron was, most likely a Maya, a shapeshifter, he presumably took the form of an elf when living among the elves for centuries. And that's the thing, like, they say he took on a fair form, and Tolkien scholars, which are a thing, if anyone's curious, I keep mentioning them, there are scholars of Tolkien's work whose entire day is spent arguing about this shit. They argue that, well, for Sauron to have lived with the elves for centuries, the form he must have taken must have been that of an elf. But because it never says it directly in the text, there's no way to know for sure.
Yeah, it's left a little bit vague, but then at the same time, it's like, how else would the elves let him get away with it, right?
Yeah, but the description of that he was greater than a man with a terrible light in his eyes, you can read that literally. It's like, okay, he looked like a man, he was in the shape of a man, but greater. Does that mean he was taller? If you read it literally, yes, but does it just mean that there was something ethereal, unnatural about him that gave you the idea that he was greater than a man? The terrible light in his eyes, does that mean he had unnaturally bright, fearsome eyes? Or does it just mean that there was, like, ambition in his eyes? Something not literal, but it's something that you could sense, especially if you are, like, a creature as canny as an elf.
Do you reckon just the elves were, like, really socially awkward about it? And so, yeah, just don't bring up the glowing eyes. Just ignore it. It's
we don't
okay.
know. That's where, like, the Peter Jackson thing came from, because they talk about him having the all-seeing eye, but is that literal, or is it just that his forces are so expansive and he's so manipulative and so powerful and has his fingers in every pie in Middle-earth? Does it just mean that he has spies everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things about Tolkien's work. Do you interpret it literally or do you interpret it metaphorically? And as mentioned, there are Tolkien scholars who do this. And I think it's a Tumblr post or something from someone who does this for a living. Like, so I'm a Tolkien scholar, and I was at like a convention, and we had an entire afternoon talking about, are there bees in Middle-earth? And all the scholars were like poring over like every text of a Silmarillion in all the books, trying to figure out like, are there bees? And someone found, well, they have mead halls. And if there are mead halls, there is honey. And if there are honey, there are bees.
Unless there's like eagles that make honey.
We don't know, but like that's the kind of thing that you can do. And it's like, I like that. Some would say, well, you're just thinking about that too much, but hey, you're watching a YouTube video about Sauron from Lord of the Rings with two dudes talking about the Wiki page. You understand that people like to think about the things they consume more than just literally interpreting the text directly as it was written.
Oh, and I will say, you explaining this stuff about Sauron, like, I don't really know much about the stuff before the movies happen and that, and the dude has got a plan and fucking patience. If he's disguised as an elf, or maybe an elf, for like hundreds of years before he finally convinces them, can you make these cool fucking rings?
Well, the elves live forever, right? So, relatively speaking, that might be like a week.
To them,
yeah.
Like, right, yeah.
That's the thing about the elves, isn't it? It's why, like, everything they do is just so perfect. They've had literally thousands of years to figure it out. Like, I was telling my friend about it, of Hugo Weaving's character when he rocks up. It's like, I think it's in the Silmarillion or one of, like, the standard, like, novels where they talk about it. Like, he used to hunt Balrogs. That's why I was like, no Balrogs. Or something like, I don't know the exact details of it, but I remember like a friend of mine who was super into Lord of the Rings who told me, there's like one passage in the Silmarillion or something where they mentioned that he would hunt Balrogs for fun, and that's why there's none left. Oh, that's how much of a fucking badass that guy is. And speaking of the Balrog, that's another huge argument about Lord of the Rings, of does the Balrog have wings? And some would say it does, others would say that the description of its fiery black wings is metaphorical. And it's like the smoke rising off it gives the appearance of wings. It's like, well, it can fly. It's like, well, a bunch of shit in Lord of the Rings can fly that doesn't have wings, right?
The most classic internet Tolkien question of all time, and the answer is no. Balrogs definitely, clearly, authoritatively do not have wings. There are no wings on Balrogs. This is extremely clear in the text.
Yeah, and the only way I've heard it argued before is there's definitely no way the Balrog had wings.
Because it fell.
And yeah, I don't know enough to know, but that's what I've always heard from other people is like, oh, did you know that the Balrog didn't have wings in the book?
Well, it depends on your interpretation. It depends how you interpret the text. And this is an entire field of study. And it is something that's caused literally decades of arguments. And for the most part, Tolkien would always remain kind of like mum on this topic, where he did like people interpreting, like, Lord of the Rings in their own way. And there are a few things where he would come out and clarify. One is, for example, when someone asked him, hey, does, like, Aragorn have a beard? Can he grow a beard? And he's like, no, not the way that Aragorn is. He can't have a beard. He's half elf. Elves don't grow beards. Okay. He's also like 8 feet tall. Another one was like, this is really funny. Whenever he would get sent sketches for the books and for like media related to Lord of the Rings, they had to sign off on. Anytime someone drew Legolas as like a stereotypical elf, so you think stereotypical elf, you think like slight, very lithe, blonde, very sharp features, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Tolkien fucking hated that. And every time he got like a drawing of Legolas like that, he'd send it back like, no. Legolas is the tallest and stoutest of the elves. I described it in my books as being like a fucking tree trunk. Make him buff. Make him buffer. And anytime he got sent Legolas artwork to approve that didn't have Legolas as the buffest motherfucker you've ever seen, he sent it back.
Obviously, like, again, just mostly what I know of Lord of the Rings is just those movies.
Exactly, yeah. And if Tolkien would have been alive when they cast Orlando Bloom as Legolas, he would have hated that casting. Because that's not how he thought Legolas should look, and it's not how he described him in the books. He is the tallest and stoutest of the elves.
I think, though, you would have seen, like, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn with the scruff and been like, you know what, I was wrong on that one.
Like, that is one of the few details about Aragorn's appearance that he directly clarified in a letter to a fan. That Aragorn cannot grow a beard.
But he will, just for the hotness.
He will for the hotness, yeah, but they're the things. But then, obviously, people now accept Viggo Mortensen's portrayal of Aragorn as the definitive portrayal of the character, even though it directly contradicts what Tolkien had in mind. Like the look of Aragorn in those movies is something Tolkien himself would have told them is not accurate.
And I do think it's always fun to ask people who, you know, are attracted to men specifically, of like, what's your type? Is it the Legolas, the Aragorn, or the sometimes Gimli?
Sometimes the Gimli. Oh, the Frodo.
You know, very, very baby Frodo in that first movie.
Yeah, one of the things when I was watching the movie, because that's another thing like in the books, like, Joe, like, Frodo just hangs out in the Shire for like 15 fucking years.
Yeah.
But one thing I was watching when, like, they go to, like, the elves and like, they give Frodo the One Ring. Why didn't the elves give him any weapons? Don't they give him the Mithril? And it's like, oh, this is like the most legendary shit ever. It's like, why don't you give everyone that? I know it's rare, but when you sat there and go, okay, what's this mission? Well, it is for the literal fate of all of, like, existence. And the elves like, okay, take one elf and one dwarf and a dude with a sword.
No, two dudes with swords. Don't forget Sean Bean's there.
Yeah. Well, you forget he's there because you know he's going to die, right? He's Sean Bean.
Like, it's not even spoiler. It's a spoiler to see Sean Bean.
Yeah, but I was just watching that of, like, again, they probably explain this in the books, but why don't the elves give, like, everyone there their magical, super, mega awesome elf weapons that never dull, can detect the presence of evil and are unbreakable? I
guess that the way every character talks and interacts with the Hobbit is it's as if they're never ever going to even, like, get in combat, right? It's unimaginable for a Hobbit to even ever think about getting into a fight.
Yeah, and that is one of the things I did like about the movie when I was watching it. They never allude to it directly, and you know, in another movie, if they remade Lord of the Rings, they would have a character say to camera, well, hobbits are naturally hard to spot, and that's what makes them, like, you know, such effective scouts and rogues, and why, you know, they don't really have any desires beyond just eating 2 breakfasts, which makes them ideal to carry the ring. But they never mention that in the text of the movie. They have faith in the audience that you'll realise that, well, hobbits are not seen as a threat, so most, like, characters in the universe and creatures just ignore them. And I think in the original books they talk about how, yeah, like, hobbits are basically fucking invisible. No one can spot them. They're like, just for some reason, they can just hide really well.
They're basically like non-beings to other people, right? Just because how little impact they have on the world normally.
But you know, if they remade Lord of the Rings, they would have someone say, because they'd have to explain it, wouldn't they? Like, oh, we need a hobbit to carry the ring because hobbits are naturally hard to spot for the orcs. It's like, you don't need to say that. Just have a scene where just the orcs always ignore Frodo because they're going after Sean Bean. It's like, there's Sean Bean! He's not dead yet! We've got 20 minutes left of the runtime and he's not dead.
It's nearly the end of the film, guys. Come on.
He's not dead yet. We need to go. Anyway, yeah, that's Sauron in Lord of the Rings. Like, as mentioned at the start of the video, let us know your favourite Lord of the Rings adaptation, or whether it is, like, you know, the original books and the Silmarillion and associated text. You can continue the conversation down in our fan Discord found below, or just in the comments section if you fancy it. We've got a Patreon where you can support and vote on new content that's upcoming, and also our socials if you'd like to go yell at us for our misunderstanding of Lord of the Rings. As I said, I'm a fan, but there's a lot of Lord of the Rings media, and I've not consumed it all.
Yeah, I've pretty much, like, watched the movies and played the video games of the movies.
And that's the thing as well, like, just, do you think if, like, Tolkien was alive, he'd be alright with the video games?
I think he'd have loved that Return of the King game. Just, like, spawn trapping the enemies in that castle, like, just pouring the lava over them over and over again.
Like, do you think if you showed Tolkien that shitpost someone did for, like, the Battle for Middle-earth games, where at the Siege of Minas Tirith, they got all of their units into the shape of a cock and balls and put the Riders of Rohan in the balls, and when the orcs broke through the tip, just the Riders of Rohan charged down the shaft? and flew out the tip and took out. Do you think he'd like that?
I think he'd consider that as art. Like, I think he'd be there raving to, like, we're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
Oh, he'd fucking love that, right? He would love that song. It's like, do you think he would, like, Shelob? Because I know, like, Shelob is portrayed as, like, a giant fucking spider in, like, the movies. And when you say Shelob, it's like, well, it's a giant fucking spider. Right? It's like, well, I guess that's the form Shelob takes, but Shelob is this ethereal and natural entity directed, like, descended from, like, the Ungoliant. It's like this fucking pre-natural being from beyond time. Yes, it looks like a spider to us, but that's not what Shelob is. Do you think he'd see, like, sexy female Shelob and be like, yeah?
He'd be like, you know what? That looks sexy, but throw the malice skin on it.
Yeah, do you think he'd be... Like, the thing is, though, the Shelob, like, in Shadow of War, the outfit that they're wearing is actually sick as fuck. Like, they're wearing, like, this black dress, but the black dress at the back, it all interlaces like a spider pattern. Like a web.
It's a very cool character design. It just is really throwing everyone off, including myself, that it's fucking Shelob. Stupid, sexy Shelob.
It's probably going to be a lot easier to, you know, lure men and lure, like, various creatures inside your literal spider's web if you look like a hot lady than it would if you're a giant fucking spider.
Imagine that, like, getting lured into a cave by, like, just this... like 10 on 10 absolutely stacked woman, and then you get in there and it's just like the spider Shelob just
she turned to a spider. You know what? I'm okay with this. Let's see
where this is going.
Let's see where this is going. You know it, Lucas. Let's see where this is going. Well, thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Thank you to everyone that is still watching this video. We would like to end by just shouting out the people on the highest tier of our Patreon.
Yes, that level of support is very much appreciated, and as a result, we would like to specifically shout out the following people.
So shout out to Be of Awesome.
Say the line, Bart!
Be of Awesome.
And one, Dan Daly.
Well, pay the man.
Dan Daly.
We love you!
Shut up, baby, I know it.
And of course, Lam de Llama.
They'll cheer for anything. Watch.
And of course, Lam de Llama.
And we do apologise for any mistakes in pronunciation there. If we did make a mistake, please let us know on Patreon or over on our Discord, both of which you can find linked below.
Thanks again for your support, and hope to see you all next time.
Cheers.